He's heckling me right now.
She should be called to order by the chair, consistent with how any other member would be treated, and she should be told she has to apologize.
I've kind of had it with their toxic masculinity, and I will not apologize, and I do expect apologies in that House with demonstrations of toxic masculinity.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Question oral. Oral questions. The honourable member for Calgary-Mindapore.
Mr. Speaker, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost of housing. A Conservative government will axe the federal GST on new homes sold. On an $800,000 home, this is a saving of $40,000. The CEO of Home West End Builders Association said that this is the most significant housing policy in 2 decades. This means more young people will get to buy a home. Will the Liberal NDP government axe the federal GST on housing sales so more young people can finally purchase a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, with these Conservatives, the proof is always in the pudding and the details are in the fine print. It really comes down to what they're going to cut in order to pay for that GST cut. And in this case, it's the Housing Accelerator Fund, which dozens of Conservative MPs have actually written to our Minister of Housing pleading with him for money for their towns and cities. So, Mr. Speaker, I pose the question back to the member. Do they really care about a Housing Accelerator Fund? Do their dozen members who have written to our Minister of Housing want the Housing Accelerator Fund for their towns and cities? Because it's not just up for renewal, Mr. Speaker, there's another round coming.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Mindapore.
Well, what Conservatives will do is end the failed Liberal housing programs that have led to the doubling of rents, mortgages, and down payments. The President of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario said, "We commend the Leader of the official opposition for putting forward this program, and we hope that the provinces will do the same." The founder of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness said, "This is smart." So will the Prime Minister make the same commitment to help young Canadians who so desperately want to purchase a home and commit to axing the federal GST on new home sales?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, I'm glad the Conservative member confirmed that their plan is to cancel the Housing Accelerator Fund, and I wonder how that makes the dozen or so Conservative members who have been pleading with our Housing Minister for the funding for their towns and cities feel, Mr. Speaker. But speaking of feelings, we saw how the Conservatives feel about people who are underhoused and unhoused yesterday at committee, Mr. Speaker. The member from Peterborough, Kawartha, in a really disgusting display of how she feels about people who are homeless, underhoused, and unhoused. She said that they're the reasons that we have poverty in Canada. I said that's the reason why we have crime in Canada, Mr. Speaker. Stigmatizing people who are underhoused, Mr. Speaker, that's not compassionate.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Mindapore.
Well, I will tell you what is disgusting, Mr. Speaker. Carbon tax Carney, conflict of interest Carney, is moving his headquarters out of Canada. This is the individual, Mr. Speaker, that is using his position as an advisor to lobby government. He is pocketing his profits as a member of the board of Stripe, and he is reaping the benefits of amortization rules through his role at Brookfield. So I'll tell you what's disgusting, Mr. Speaker. Why is this Prime Minister exempting conflict of interest Carney, carbon tax Carney, from conflict of interest laws? That's disgusting, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, what you see, Mr. Speaker, is as soon as somebody doesn't support what the Conservatives do, they're slandered and attacked, and incendiary language is used about an individual in this instance who's served his country in so many different capacities, both as Governor of the Bank of Canada, was also Governor of the Bank of England, is recognized internationally as making incredible contributions to the world and its thinking about finance. And what we get from the party opposite is ad hominem attacks, personal insults, all because they don't share their opinion. That's concerning, Mr. Speaker.
For Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Carbon tax Carney is this Prime Minister's top economic advisor, and he's moving his $1 trillion international investment firm out of Canada and to another country. Carbon tax Carney will now be advising this Liberal Prime Minister from Wall Street. These two economic vandals have quadrupled the carbon tax on Canadians, while carbon tax Carney's jet setting off to New York City. It's profits over people, while the Prime Minister exempts carbon tax Carney from Canada's conflict of interest laws. So So why is the Prime Minister exempting now conflict of interest, Carney, from ethics laws while he operates his company from Wall Street?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Okay, the Honourable Minister.
Well, it's clear that that member, from reading his statement, has spent his day trying to malign the character of a good Canadian. I can tell you that I'm not reading notes right now because I spent my morning working on pharmacare and dental care and trying to connect care to people. And I should wonder if he would go and say to his constituents, you know what I did today? I attacked the character of a wonderful Canadian. I spent my morning thinking of ways to come up with slogans and attack lines to somebody who served his country in the world. That's not how I spent my morning. I spent my morning thinking about Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Yeah. That minister and his government spent their morning making life more unaffordable for Canadians, sending record numbers of Canadians to line up at food banks, doubling mortgages, doubling rents. That's the record of this Liberal government, and that failure of a health minister with records number of Canadians who don't have a doctor. And this exemplary Canadian that they claim in conflict of interest, carbon tax Carney, let's talk about what he did since he got that job. He got Brookfield into negotiations for 10 billion Canadian tax dollars. His credit card company Stripe is now gouging Canadian small businesses, and he's been exposed for lobbying illegally UK ministers in the heat pump hustle. It's unacceptable. What can we have a carbon?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, we're used to that member playing politics in this House and attacking and maligning the character of great Canadians. But let me reference a member that these individuals on the Conservative benches like to quote over and over and over again. Yesterday, the food professor Sylvain Charlebois at Indu Committee said climate change is the agri-food sector's greatest challenge and we need to address it, which is very interesting because if you listen to the Conservatives every day complain and holler about food prices in this country, you'd think that they had a plan or some form of solution, but they do not have a plan to...
Statistics Canada confirmed this week that under the NDP Liberals, Canadians are getting poorer. Statistics Canada tracks the prosperity of Canadians. And in 8 of the last 9 quarters, they report that Canadians are getting poorer. And what is worse is that the Royal Bank predicts the Liberal legacy is going to continue. This is why more than half of Canadians are struggling to pay for their everyday essentials. Meanwhile, U.S. prosperity grew by 2.8%. Will the Prime Minister reverse the Liberal recession and axe the taxes that are making Canadians poorer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Rural Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's time for a history lesson from my colleague. You know, our government since 2015, we've invested in Canadians, we've invested in the Canadian economy, we've invested in the business world, we've invested in our community organization. But lesson number 2, Mr. Speaker, when they were in power in 2014, they made major budget cuts on the back of our men and women who serve. Do you remember they closed 9 veteran offices right across the country, one of which was in Nova Scotia? But good news, Mr. Speaker, yesterday was the 8th anniversary of the reopening of the veteran office in Nova Scotia. I would
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Well, there's a typical NDP Liberal Nova Scotian who thinks that Canadians have never had it so good. He thinks that quadrupling the carbon tax, which he wants to do, is good for Canadians, that they're increasing housing taxes, that increasing job-killing capital gains taxes are good for Canadians. Well, let me tell you what The Economist says. The Economist says now that Canada is poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the U.S. The Economist also says that over the last 5 years, the U.S. economic growth has doubled Canada's. The Financial Post says Canadian standard of living decline is the worst in 40 years. Will the Prime Minister axe the taxes that are making Canadians...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, you know what the Conservatives are talking about right now? They're talking about making cuts. The question is, what cuts is he going to be making with his leader and his government? So they want to make cuts to childcare. They want to make cuts to daycare, $10 a day. They want to make cuts to dental care. They want to make cuts to pharmacare. Mr. Speaker, I even heard that they're going to move the retirement age from 65 to 67. No, I heard 67, 68, 69. What is it? Let's have the real truth. Share with Canadians. How many cuts are you going to make? When are you making the cuts? We're ready. We want to hear. Canadians want to know where you're going to make those cuts.
The honourable member for Calgary Shepherd.
Canadians are struggling with skyrocketing costs on everything from groceries to gas, and now we see the toll it's taken on our economy. Statistics Canada confirms what families already know. This NDP Liberal coalition is not worth the cost. GDP per person has dropped 8 out of the last 9 quarters. Meanwhile, in the U.S., GDP grew by nearly 3% last quarter. Why? Because NDP Liberals keep taxing Canadians into the ground with their hikes on the carbon tax, the housing tax, and the job-killing capital gains tax. So will the Prime Minister finally axe these tax hikes that are driving Canadians into poverty?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, time and time again we hear in this House Conservatives speaking up for vulnerable people, but then what do they say when they're in committee, Mr. Speaker? Listen to this. The member from Peterborough, Kawartha said, quote, "Guess what happens when you don't have a house? You go commit crime because you're in poverty." Mr. Speaker, it's shameful that as we stand up to lift Canadians up, Conservatives use vulnerable people as props and then demonize them and blame them for crime in this country. It's truly shameful, and Canadians should see through their rhetoric.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are ignoring rising food insecurity, something Manitobans know all too well. Over 50,000 people in Manitoba now rely on food banks. And Harvest Manitoba president says we're moving in the wrong direction. Obviously, the Liberals' backdoor talks with grocer CEOs are going nowhere. And Conservatives are listening to lobbyists and staying silent on price gouging. So will the Liberals adopt the NDP strategy of capping food prices and ending hunger?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, our government has been committed to making life more affordable for Canadians. We've done a number of things that have reduced household expenses for Canadians. The childcare fees, 50% reduction, that's $800 a month in savings for the average family. That's significant savings. That's savings that Canadians can use, their families can use to pay for groceries. We've also offered a grocery rebate. We've offered a 50% reduction in childcare fees. We've offered pharmacare and a national school food program. All of these measures make life more affordable for Canadians.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre standing on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. During my question period, the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, while his Conservative bros giggled around him, heckled me in this chamber. Now, I've had to remind this member before to calm down on his toxic masculinity. So I'm asking through you, Mr. Speaker, for him to control his inner macho man and apologize. Thank you.
While I appreciate the help, I would just remind all and everyone to maintain decorum in the House.
Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the second occasion where I've seen the member from Leeds, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. He's heckling me right now. If I threatened physical violence against members. Last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago, he was doing this to a woman, the member from Edmonton, Strathcona, and now he's doing it to Liberal members across the way. I just want to remind him through you, as he heckles me in the House, that this isn't the WWE, that we're in the Chamber of Commons, the House of Commons. And that he should show a little bit more respect and refrain from his violent behavior.
On the same point of order. On the main topic, the honourable member.
Point of order. Not only is that absolutely false, I've never threatened anyone with violence in this place, number one. Number two, in this instance, the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell did make a homophobic comment in this House mere minutes ago, and I encouraged him, in raising my hands, to stand up and make the same comment again. Now, should the NDP members be okay with that type of conduct in here? Well, I'll leave that to their own conscience and for them to explain that to their constituents. I can tell you that I find it reprehensible and unacceptable. And again, that member should withdraw and apologize, because the claim that she made is unsubstantiated. It's not been captured and answered, and it certainly hasn't been something that's been adjudicated on by the chair. So, Mr. Chair, I would ask that you invite that member to apologize for saying something that is demonstrably not true.
Is the member rising on the same topic?
Said that they were hiding behind the curtain. I said there's nothing wrong with coming from behind the curtain. There was nothing wrong.
The member from Winnipeg has today and on many occasions made comments that are clearly unparliamentary, making accusations against members, regardless of whether you couch them in whatever kind of framing around demographics. There are clear rules around parliamentary language, and this member from Winnipeg consistently uses unparliamentary language, as we've just heard on multiple occasions today. She should be called to order by the chair, consistent with how any other member would be treated, and she should be told she has to apologize.
Exactly.
Toujours un rappel au règlement, l'honorable député de Winnipeg Centre.
This is really entertaining, coming from the member from Fort Lawn, Saskatchewan, who was heckling me during QP. Toxic masculinity I will not take back, including the toxic masculinity that I've seen from the other member. I have seen it physically with my own eyes. You can't capture physical doing this to members, including female members. I've kind of had it with their toxic masculinity, and I will not apologize, and I do expect apologies in that House with demonstrations of toxic masculinity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bon. Toujours sur le même sujet, l'honorable député.
Chair, just with respect to the accusations about what I allegedly said during question period, as I recall, I honestly wasn't even paying attention to her question during question period. But the point is, holding your arms out is not an act of violence, and this member is repeatedly using unparliamentary language in the House. One cannot say in the House the things this member has said. This member thinks that she can get away with ignoring the rules. And I think it's important that there be one standard of adherence to parliamentary rules. The name-calling, the insults are unparliamentary, and this member needs to be brought to order.